So today's webinar, we are hosting Dr. Sina Azodi, which is the director of the Middle East Studies program at George Washington University. He's an expert on U.S.-Iran relations, nuclear non-proliferation, and Iranian foreign policies. Also the author of the forthcoming book, Iran and the Bomb, the United States, Iran, and the Nuclear Question. If you wish to look and order the book, which is going to be out in June 2026, Dr. Azudi has provided us with a link in the chat option where you can basically have a copy of the book ordered to you. We are also going to share with all the participants a summary of this webinar in which we're going to share also a code for a discount for this book. So just be aware of that as well. So at this point, I want to welcome Dr. Azudi. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar today.
Thank you, Oren. Good to be with you again.
So I think we call this webinar a crossroad because there's really kind of a situation which is very rare in international geopolitics where an entire decision-making process is summarized into a left or right. Usually decisions are much more complex. They have so many more variables in them. But this is one of those situations where you really see, are we going to go and go ahead with the nuclear program as we have so by the Iranian leadership, or are we going to have to hold back and basically retreat from that progress and procedure that we had in the following in the years before. And it's really rare to see something like that. Maybe we see that in Ukraine with Putin. Maybe we see that with Netanyahu in Gaza a little bit before that. But it's really where you see in the international order a moment where one decision can basically change the course of a nation, so to speak, and the leadership have to make that decision. And this is why we call it Tehran at a crossroads, because it really needs to make a decision left or right, so to speak. So my first question to you here is, we understand the dilemma they have, but I want to a little bit start with why are they in this situation in the first place? How come the Iranian leadership is so much keen into this nuclear program? Why are they so much into it? And they're putting so much of their political stake into this decision.
Well, thanks again for having me. Why Iranians insist on having a nuclear program for a number of reasons. And all these reasons go back to the Shah's time when he started a nuclear program. And I would say there are three main drivers. One, security. Two, the modernization of Iran. And third is energy. On secure and depending on Iran's strategic environment, one of these drivers has been pushed to the front seat or the driver's seat, and at times the other ones were in the back seat. When the Shah started the program, he didn't know what he wanted to do with the program, so he just wanted to show off to other countries in the region that he has one. And this is something that Islamic Republic also does. And they've said it explicitly with Ayatollah Khamenei suggesting that, countries that don't have a nuclear program like Iran does, they're backward. He doesn't name them, but he's referring to the countries of the region. So that's one of the, I think, one of the key drivers and how Iran views itself as a modernizing country. Second, and again goes back to the Shah's time, it's the issue of energy. Iran is a very large country, has a lot of population. Its population is increasing even further. And they found the nuclear program to be the answer to Iran's needs. And this is something that Shah discovered, and actually Ali Larijani repeatedly pointed out in early 2000s, along with the late President Hashemi Rafsanjani, who said repeatedly that Iran's answer to its energy needs is nuclear. Now, there's a lot of debate nowadays that whether going solar or renewable energy would have been a better answer to Iran's needs, but that's a separate issue. And thirdly, I think it's the issue of security. I think that Iranians have always, the evidence that I've seen, primary documents that I've looked at, Iranians have always wanted to have the option of going for the bomb should the political leadership ever decided to weaponize. The reason that, let me have a little side story. The title of my book is Iran and the Bomb, but it was supposed to be Iran on the edge, meaning that Iranians were always interested in being on the edge of weaponization. There are different voices in Iran. Some of them, mainly the military and the security oriented people, they think that Iran needs the bomb for its security, and some other, including the people in foreign ministries, Zarif, the former foreign minister Zarif. These are kind of the people who think that the nuclear arsenal would initially benefit Iran, but in the long term could harm Iran's interests by starting a chain reaction of nuclear weapons in the region, meaning that Saudi Arabia would also go nuclear, and ultimately Iran would be left weakened. So these are the questions. So this is the answer to why Iran insists so much on having a robust nuclear program, the three drivers that I mentioned. And Iran at the crossroads, whether they want to go left or right. My short answer is I think right now they're going to wait and see if there are better alternatives for them. Because either left or right, meaning either they're surrendering the program, is going to be detrimental to their political and international legitimacy. The optics are going to be very bad. And also, weaponization will also be very risky for Iran at this juncture.
So it's one of those moments when we saw that when other leaderships encounter that, like you damn if you do, you damn if you don't, and you don't have good decisions ahead of you. It's only bad and worse. So let's go with one decision here for a second. If they continue with the nuclear program and they continue with the development towards achieving a nuclear weapon, in what way do you think this could benefit the leadership, which logically would be why they're doing it at this moment, or why would they go with that option?
You have to forgive me now. I'm going to go a little academic for a second. From a domestic standpoint, it will give the regime some legitimacy in terms of making it, one of the few governments, one of the few regimes in the world that has been finally able to finish or cross the finish line and develop nuclear weapons. An Iranian scientist once told me that Iran entered the 20th century on mules and donkeys, but it entered the 21st century with uranium enrichment. So it gives them at least, some of the constituents in Iran that still believes in Islamic Republic. For them, it gives the Islamic Republic some legitimacy. Internationally, there are different, perspectives on it. It could make Iran a pariah, further a pariah, like North Korea. It could also, but from their perspective, they get to see that they get to have a seat at the table with the great powers, the U.S., the Chinese, the Russians, the French, the Brits, and mainly for them, it's sitting on a table with the Americans, the Brits, and the French, most of them with an imperial background in Iran. And one of the reasons that, in fact, they expanded the program so much, they miscalculated and expanded the program so much, was that they believe that without the nuclear program, none of these great powers would give Iran a seat at the negotiation table. Why would the United States even talk to Iran if it wasn't because of its nuclear program? The U.S. doesn't need Iran, does not see a need to give Iran any concessions, except when it comes to its very expansive nuclear program.
Let me challenge you there a little bit. It seems
Sure,
that
please.
it's more of a regime survival more than anything, in the sense that we see that they probably saw Iraq, they probably saw Gaddafi with Libya, and on the other hand, they're seeing North Korea. with the bomb and the regime there. So, in the end of the day, is it an Iranian interest versus a regime interest? I.e., the same question I asked not so long ago in a webinar to one of the experts about Russia: is it a Putin war or a Russia war? And he says it was a Putin war. So, is it a regime nuclear bomb chase, or is it an Iranian national interest that really has national interest in the core of them?
I think it's a great question. I think it's both. They saw what happened to Gaddafi and Saddam. They actually pointed to Gaddafi's fate. Khamenei said publicly that look at what Gaddafi did. You know, he was fooled. He gave up whatever he had. They came, they shipped everything that he had, they shipped him out, and then they attacked him. So absolutely, you're right. I would say it's regime. It's also the question of Iran as a country. You have to keep in mind that Iran is a country that was invaded three times in less than a century. World War One, Iran was a neutral country. It was invaded. It was occupied. Iran lost a fourth of its population. World War Two, again, it was occupied. It was a neutral country. It was occupied. Its neutrality was ignored. And this is a point that actually Shah repeatedly made that neutrality in international politics doesn't mean anything. It's always about great powers. And we also saw what happened with Iraq, invasion of Iran in 1980 by Iraq, supported by the West, the Brits mainly, the French, chemical weapons. And the people who are at the leadership position now were all volunteers. They fought the war, so they remember, they know what it means. So the point is, I think it's both for the regime, it's a matter of survival. And I believe that Iranians, because of the history that they went through, they see it as a matter of necessity for their survival. And again, this is why the Shah also had a nuclear weapons program, which most people don't know about.
How much of this topic of the nuclear right to have a nuclear weapon and to maintain it for national security reasons, how much does that mix with another topic which we see emerging, which is the generational change within the leadership
Mhm.
and the fact that we're talking already about the basically Khamenei's rule and who's going to inherit him, those inerrancies struggling within the leadership. How much is that topic becomes, in a sense, kind of linked to that or connected to that as a way to
Mhm.
for whoever is struggling for the power to use it for their own advantage?
Well, let me give you a quote. I could not use it in the book because I was prohibited, but I can say it here. I spoke with a member of Iran, a former member of Iran's National Security Council, and he told me that Khamenei had explicitly told him that Iran can give up enrichment under two conditions: that either when Khamenei dies or when he resigns. And this is like early 2000s. Khamenei did not resign. I don't think he has any plans to resign. We could potentially, there's always a possibility that a future leader would decide that it's not going to worth it. It's not worth it. And enrichment is not a matter of necessity for Iran. I see it very unlikely, but it is possible. In terms of the military, I think the generational change will matter because the current senior commanders of IRGC are all veterans of the Iran-Iraq War. They are, some of them are victims of chemical weapons. They've seen the brutality of Iran-Iraq War, whereas the future generation of IRGC, when these people are pushed to the side or whatever happens, in any case, when they leave the scene, the new generation that comes out, they're not experienced with an all-out war like the Iran-Iraq war. At best, they're the veterans of the Syrian theater, which was not an all-out war. So their perspective will be different in a sense that the current generation is more cautious because, again, because of the experience of the Iran-Iraq war, whereas the future generation will not be as cautious. That's how I think a generational change will impact the nuclear program. But I believe that in the long term, the nuclear policies of Iran will not change, and even a regime change will not fundamentally affect the nuclear posture.
Now, we've seen that the snapback mechanism is already in effect. We saw the June, the 12 days war between Iran and Israel, including a U.S. airstrike against Iran itself. So it seems that we saw so many developments in the last year we haven't seen before, and yet the change of policy is not there. Like it's not going to happen like there was always this stick in the air where we're gonna let Israel strike Iran and then we're gonna finish with the nuclear program. And it seems that we're not. That's not the case anymore. The stick was used, and the decision by the leadership is to maintain kind of a status quo of not giving up on the program but not moving forward and ahead with it. So, what do you think could lead to a change in the Iranian leadership decision to maintain the current policy? Is it going to be worsening of the current situation that we see, the economic situation? Would it be a social unrest? Is there any international pressure that haven't been used? Because I just mentioned sanctions. The snapbacks are pretty harsh. The war itself was pretty harsh. So, what would be the kind of a driver that could lead to a change in policy of the current leadership?
I wish I knew the answer to that. But listen, there's a fundamental difference in Iranian thinking when it comes to developing policies and executing policies and American thinking. The American thinking goes based on election cycles every 4 years. But that's not how Iranians think. Iranians think in terms of decades ahead. This is why they're much slower in terms of decision making. For them, as Kissinger put it, for Chinese, every solution leads them to a more difficult problem. So this is why they are so slow, aside from the fact that there is a lot of elite competition in Iran. Nobody wants to be in charge of making the decision, ultimately pushing it ahead and above to Khamenei, or in the time of the Shah, it was the Shah himself. So, honestly, I don't know what, will fundamentally change their policy, but my view is that, and I've always said it, that without enrichment in Iran, the US is not going to get a deal with Iranians. For them, it's a matter of a national pride. They've invested so much, both financially and politically, and if they want to give up on it right now, it will be a political suicide. This is why the foreign minister Araghchi comes out publicly and says, "Well, we insist on enrichment because it is so dear to us." He can't say it's a matter of national pride for us, we have invested so much in it. But that's how he puts it. For them, I mean, again, this is a different legal interpretation that the US and Iran have on Article 4 of the NPT, but they believe they have a right. Now, whether it is true or not, that's a separate issue. But from their perspective, they have the right to enrich, and because they have the right, they must have it. So I think that, and history teaches us that it was only détente happened when Obama realized that having a limited enrichment will be more beneficial in Iran, will be more beneficial to the United States than having no deal and an expansive Iranian nuclear program that is only 10 days or a month or if only a few days from weaponization. And I'll stop here. Look, you can bomb the facility. You can always bomb the facility. You can bomb the infrastructure. But once you have the capacity to build it, you can always rebuild the program. So Iranians might wait a few years and say, well, now the time is, ripe for reconstituting the program. The question is, what would the US be doing then?
In what way do you see the Iranian leadership strategy have changed in the last 12 months, in the last year, considering the sanctions, the war, considering the nuclear program basically being on hold because of the fear to ignite again a second wave of war and a U.S. strike, Israeli strikes, and so on. In what way did they change their strategy, or what would you say was a kind of an adjustment or change that you can kind of point the finger out and say this is different than before?
Good question. Let me tell you what I think how their perspective has changed. For years and decades, they tried to avoid a direct confrontation with the United States. They did everything they could. Early 2000s, they did their best to avoid confrontation with the US. For years, they tried it because they know in a direct military confrontation, they're going to lose and they're going to lose very bad. But the attacks of June for them was a watershed moment, meaning that what they had tried to avoid for decades had already happened. So everything they had done had failed, and it could not get worse for them. So that's how their perspective has changed. They believe that at least from my understanding of their view, is that war has already happened. They've learned their vulnerabilities, which is a lot of vulnerability, and they've also learned their points of strength. I think that the Iranian leadership was already under a lot of pressure to decide on the fate of the program, which was either to stay as a non-nuclear weapon state or under the pressure of public, and there is some public pressure to weaponize and political pressure to weaponize. The grandson of Ayatollah Khomeini had publicly said that Iran should revise its defense doctrine. 39 members of the parliament had already asked for it publicly. So, but in terms of policy, I'm not sure how their nuclear policies have changed. I think that they've learned that prolonging the negotiations was a mistake and a miscalculation under the Biden administration.
We know that the former security strategy was based on the threshold, nuclear threshold, the missiles program slash drones,
Mhm.
and the proxies, the idea of proxies, i.e. Hezbollah, the Houthis, and so on. Do you think, considering what we've seen in the last year, not only and the year before that, not only with the June war, but also the collapse in Syria, um, what we see in Yemen, which is also struggling there, and the fact that Hezbollah is basically crippled in Lebanon, is there more of a push because of that towards the nuclear threshold? Because we know with the missile, it's kind of obvious that the Iranian leadership made a decision to invest in that because they see that
Yes.
as an effective tool. So for me, that's not so much as much as a question, but on the threshold, considering the events of the last year, do you think that may have pushed them to say, you know what, we can only consider our own security and ourselves here, and this will give us that. Uh, do we see that kind of a change, maybe?
I would go a little further back. I agree with you, but I would go for a little further back. The early sign that I witnessed was in 2019 when the former intelligence minister said on TV, and I was shocked to see it on Iranian TV, that our defense doctrine is no nuclear weapons, but if you corner a cat, it will act differently than a cat that is roaming free. That was the first evidence that I saw that there's something happening. And more recently, especially after the October 7 war, there were more public discussion, which was on the benefits and the costs of weaponization, which, I mean, to me was a shocking development, seeing that Iranian state TV is publicly discussing it. Prior to that, it was a taboo to even discuss it. But now you're seeing people publicly discussing it, of the benefits of weaponization, some of the dangers of weaponization. Commentators are publicly saying it. Last week there was a member of an Iranian lawmaker who's also a member of the Foreign Policy and National Security. He mentioned that Russia will be okay with Iran having a nuclear weapon. Now, I don't know if this is, just the classic Iranian bazaar strategy of, hyping the situation or not. But the fact that they're discussing it, I think, is very important. But I think ultimately, Khamenei has decided that he doesn't want to be the one who makes the ultimate decision on weaponization. I mean, at the age of 85, I think he has decided that this should pass on to the next leader. But I know that he has been under a lot of pressure from the political elite.
One of the
Let me
changes which,
one
yes,
quick
sorry.
add. There is a difference between the political decision and the ability to do it because weaponization takes time, despite the fact that Iran has a capacity.
So I want to touch on a change that happened recently in the whole region, which was uh, after the Israeli attack in Qatar. The United States basically provided Qatar with an alliance which was not thinkable, I would say, even before that, and which led to another alliance with the Saudis, and the idea of the procurement of F-35s and so on. So those are two things. Even though Qatar has much better relations with Iran, but I want to touch on the Saudi here. The Saudis are pushing for nuclear energy. They're pushing for empowerment of their military strength, i.e., the F-35s.
Yeah.
And behind the scenes, there are talks about, I mean, why a country so rich of natural oil and gas reserves needs nuclear energy in the case of Saudi Arabia, which kind of leads the way about are the Saudis planning to become nuclear at some point. So how does those two massive things, and maybe the main thing here is the U.S. change towards the Saudis and the open arms that the U.S. administration have for them. How is that kind of playing right now with the Iranian leadership, and particularly in this, in between those groups, hawks and doves, when it comes to nuclear weapon moving forward with it or not?
Well, again, you have to forgive me. I'm going to go a little academic. The basic concept in international affairs of security dilemma, when you arm the weapon, arm the region, F-35s for Saudi Arabia, F-35s for Israel, F-35s for Qatar or anybody else, and Iran is, unable to catch up because it's under sanctions. They have very few options. One is to expand their missile program, or to get the ultimate defensive weapon. And if Iran decides that, they have no other choice and they have to get the bomb, it will put significant pressure on the Saudis to go for the bomb. Now, Saudis don't have the robust infrastructure that Iran has. It will take them a few decades. Question is whether the United States will allow Saudi Arabia to have plutonium reprocessing or uranium enrichment. I don't think so. I don't believe that the US will grant Saudi Arabia that right. But ultimately, again, Saudi Arabia will be under tremendous political pressure to go for the bomb. It might ask the United States to station nuclear weapons on Saudi soil. I've seen reports that I don't know how credible they are, but I've seen some reports that Saudis funded Pakistan's nuclear program, and now, in light of their defense pact, that attack is one of them is attack on the other one. They might ask Pakistanis to sell them nuclear weapons. The Saudis have many options, but I think that Iran will see itself more weakened given these developments. It also adds to Iran's traditional thinking that they are the victims of a violent international sorry, I forgot, violent international world that Law does not mean anything. It's a rule of jungle, and only the powerful will survive. This, Thucydides approach of strong do what they will. Look what happened after the June attacks. Security Council or the IAEA did not mention anything on the attacks on Iranians, whereas when Qatar was attacked, Security Council condemned them. So Iranians find themselves more isolated. It adds more fuel to the sentiment that nobody likes them. And at the end of the day, they have to fight for their own survival. So that's how I think Iranians are viewing this.
But is there a revision within Iraq on the current situation, which is kind of a Gordic knot? The more they push towards the nuclear weapons program, the more it leads them to become under sanctions, the less they can benefit from the natural reserves they have, the more they create friction between themselves and regional powers, including the US, and so on and so on. So I'm wondering if there is a sense of, and maybe this is me looking at the dove, so to speak, here, a sense of saying, you know what, we've been trying the same thing again and again. Maybe we should change direction and try something else because look at Qatar, look at Saudi Arabia, look at
Yes.
the other Gulf states. They're so much more advanced now because of their ability to use their natural reserves in a way that gives them influence and powers, which we are not gaining
Mhm.
with our nuclear program. So, is there kind of a reformist moving from that perspective, meaning kind of countering the conventional Iranian leadership wisdom within Iran, and how are they being perceived?
I think there are two different camps. One is the China camp, and the other one is the North Korea camp. I'm looking at Iranian domestic politics. The China camp says, look, we might not like, we might have ideological differences with the West, but we can work with them. We have to work with them. And to ensure the survival of the regime, to strengthen the regime, we have to engage with them. I think people like Rouhani, people like Zarif, people like Pezeshkian himself, that's the view that they have. So they don't see this, inevitable confrontation between, two different civilizations, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one view. And we saw the fruit of this approach in the JCPOA. The Obama administration and the Rouhani administration were not buddies, but they could do business with each other, right? There's also another camp, which, and I call it the North Korea camp. Their perspective is, look, we don't need the outside world. We don't have to engage with them. There's an, ideological confrontation with the West, and all we have everything that we need. We don't need to negotiate. We don't need to give up anything or concede to anything. All we need is weaponization. Look what they did to Iraq. Look what they did to Libya. Look what they couldn't do to North Korea because it has a bomb. So there are two different approaches. There's a lot of pull and push. Who's going to become the president? Who's going to have a majority in the parliament? But ultimately, and I think that Khamenei himself rules like a king, divide and conquer. He makes sure that neither party gets too powerful, and because he wants to maintain his position as the king. That's how I see it. Now, what will happen in the future? My best answer is I don't know. Unfortunately, the U.S. and Iran are not synced. And what I mean by that is when the Americans want to engage with Iran and genuinely engage with Iran, Iranians are not ready for it because of the past. And when Iranians are ready, and at least there's an administration in Iran that wants to engage with the US and genuinely is interested, the administration in the US is not interested. And I'll say one last word about this. The Trump administration approach is that I'm going to beat the hell out of you, and then I'm willing to talk to you. And I don't think Iranians like the optics of being beaten up by the US and showing up bruised and with band-aids to the negotiation table. They want to keep their heads up when they enter the negotiation table. And that's why I think they're not willing to talk with the Americans at the moment.
So that leads me to a question we received prior to this webinar. The question has been, have the Iranian leadership changed their mind about Trump? Obviously, the Trump 1.0 versus Trump 2.0, that's the question.
Yeah,
Has
yeah.
there been a change in the Iranian leadership and their perception of Trump and how they perceive him, the deal maker, the guy who's willing to go and talk to Putin? We see now what's going on in the negotiations related
Mhm.
to Ukraine, and everything else that Trump brought in since January. It looks like a long time, but it's only been since January
Sure.
this year. So, is there a change in the way he's being perceived by the Iranian leadership?
Yes, I think so. Trump V1, you had an ideological administration in the US, Pompeo, John Bolton, all these, so-called hawks who had devoted their lives in making sure that Iran and the US stay adversarial powers. And in Tehran, you had an administration, the foreign minister had expertise on international law. The president, also an expert on international law. So they spoke different languages. But Trump V2, with the removal of Mike Pompeo and John Bolton, and having Iranians having the experience of dealing with Trump V1, they learn how to talk with the Trump administration, or at least Trump himself. All the tweets that Iranian foreign minister would put up in capitalized letters, failed Biden team, all those were hints at Trump himself. The conversation that Iranian president had with Tucker Carlson or interviews with Fox News, I think these were all attempts to get close to Trump himself. They believe, but after the war, I think they think that all the efforts that they had put were futile. Trump is ultimately is interested in attacking Iran, and so that's how I think Iranians think about Trump V2.
And going back to your previous China versus North Korea approaches, it seems to me that we're what you're describing looks like a stalemate that is based on the idea that because Khamenei wants to preserve power, he's not going to make a decision that doesn't because that doesn't preserve him and his rule and his leadership. So stalemate is the status quo, and the change is not going to come from outside, but from inside. Khamenei no longer being the being holder of the crown, so to speak,
Sure.
which makes the question of who is going to inherit Khamenei much more critical. Which goes back to the question I asked in the beginning: how much those two camps, or the race for the crown, so to speak, how much is that
Yes.
placed into those two camps, right? So, how do you see that moment when Khamenei is no longer in power? How critical is that moment? Because we spoke about the two camps and what they have, but how critical is going to be that moment for whoever wants to influence, or whoever wants to at least try to have some sort of their own favorite side there? How critical is going to be that moment when Khamenei is going to be gone and someone else is going to take power?
Well, allow me to go back 2,000 years ago or 3,000 years ago, when every time a Persian king died, there was a vicious battle in the Persian court over who gets the crown. Princes were beheaded, blinded, sent to exile. And I think that when Khamenei leaves the scene, now we're not discussing princes anymore, the political elite will be sacrificed, and ultimately, the one who can create a political consensus can emerge as the supreme leader. I think a strong candidate will be someone who has the backing of IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard Corps. I've always had this theory, and we discussed this before. I would not be surprised if we had a coup-style hostile takeover of the Iranian state institutions. Now, I'm not saying that there will be APCs and tanks rolling on, streets of Tehran, but I think given that IRGC has a lot of money to spend, it controls the media, it controls the economy, it is the military. So I would not be surprised if they played a significant role in choosing who will become the next Persian king.
And if we get to that moment, whoever comes to the crown is going to be going towards a direction of maybe putting on hold the nuclear program, even if they are from the IRGC, because that could be something that serves their own interest. The economic, as you said, the economic
Absolutely.
network they have and benefits they have are suffering from the sanction to some extent. Some people say the sanctions are actually good for them because it allows them to maintain their
They are.
monopoly
Mhm.
inside Iran. But the question here is, if that's going to happen and they're going to put a hold on the program, do you see a potential shift in the policy of the United States towards Iran? And I'm asking the question not from the Iranian side, but from your knowledge of what in the United States there the discussion is when it comes to Iran and policy making. If Iran decides to put on hold the program, how much feasible it is that the United States will change its policy under Trump towards Iran?
Under Trump, I think there is a lot of I hope that it happens. I will absolutely support any approach by the Trump administration to engage with Iranians. I will say this first. But unfortunately, I'm not that optimistic. And the reason is uh, the Trump administration thinks that the so-called threat of Iranian nuclear program has been eliminated. There is no need to engage with Iranians. So I don't see much. I'm quite pessimistic in any change. Mostly, first of all, because of what I said, and second, there's this issue of othering Iran. I'm reading a book on how America's foreign policy on Iran is being made, and the author is making the very interesting case that one of the reasons that Iran and the US cannot engage with each other is the so-called othering of Iran. Oh, you have to keep in mind the U.S. fought uh, Vietnam. It occupied Iraq, but ultimately, or China, for example, for that matter, or Germany, for that matter, but ultimately and very quickly shifted and restored diplomatic relations with all of them. Now, in the case of Iran, that technically the US and Iran have never fought each other. But why is that, we are not seeing any real engagement? And that is the main problem, it seems, that there's too much othering of Iran, and that is Iranians aren't worth negotiations. Or if any time any president, whether Trump or Obama, try to engage with Iranians, there's a lot of pushback in Congress suggesting that, oh, by negotiating with Iranians, we're giving them legitimacy. And I believe that talking to the other side does not give anyone legitimacy. Or what some people ask in Washington is that when you're sitting at a negotiation table with Iranians, the US should not appease Iran. But my perspective, as someone who has always advocated for US Iranian rapprochement, is that any agreement should generally involve reciprocal concessions. I think that by making sure that the other side is also happy with the agreement that they're signing, you can make sure that that agreement is guaranteed to last much longer than it is in an unconditional surrender. That's how I think things are headed. I wish I had better news.
But it's interesting because we do see that the Trump administration is engaging in diplomacy when it comes to Ukraine, for example. And we saw that in the case in Gaza also.
Mhm.
So it seems that the deal maker perception of Trump, as much as it was a PR, as well as kind of a the man himself like to describe himself like that, there was some grain of truth in that. That in the end of the day, he is seeking those kind of like peace treaties and those agreements. Um, but are we seeing the Iranian leadership maybe reshifting in the sense of at least from rhetorics or from policies or maybe even from the perception of changing in terms of how they are conducting themselves directly with the United States? Is there anything that you see that they are kind of making a case or anyone making a case that we should kind of change it because there is a way to make a deal here, there is a way to gain some potential diplomatic gains here?
I think, as I said earlier, I think they tried. All the tweets that the Iranian foreign minister would put out, all the comments by Pezeshkian that Iran is open to do business with American companies. Iran is, open for American companies. All those things were gestures from Iranians to the Trump administration, again, Trump, the deal maker, to get his attention. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. So, and it's going back to your point on Ukraine, my understanding of Trump's worldview is that middle powers don't matter. It's always about great powers working with each other, determining or setting the future of the middle powers who don't play a role in international politics. And that's the worldview that Trump has on Iran. I mean, look, Iran is a middle power that doesn't pose any serious threat to the United States. It's a bargaining chip, which was the nuclear program, has been severely weakened. So perhaps I'm not sure, I'm not inside Trump's head, but I think that Trump thinks that why should I even give concessions to the Iranians where I've already destroyed their program? That's their think. That's what I think Trump's thinking is.
One last question before I go into the scenarios. So one of the questions I always like to ask is, do you think that the perception of time, i.e. time is on our side or time is against us, do you think the perception of time in the sense of how the current leadership perceives time, do you think that they are considering time to be on their benefit? I let's sit down and wait. Time is on our side, or there is a pressuring momentum here where they say, you know what, time is running out. We really need to do something, whatever that something is. And we talked about the stalemate. We talked about
Mhm.
the idea of a Chinese kind of a mindset of looking into generational and years versus now. But even within that, there's always the idea of, you know what, maybe time is not on our side or time is on our side. Where do you see they see that in terms of that perception?
I teach a class on Iran's modern history and politics, and I start the class from 1600s. I think that in the span of 2,000 years, 3,000 years of statehood, um, 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 they believe that time is on their side. They can wait longer for better opportunities to arrive. The only incident that I remember seeing Iranians were in rush to uh, felt under pressure of time was after 9/11 when Iranians were so quick to condemn the attacks and send messages to the Americans that we were not involved. Or actually, the case of October 7th too, that the Iranians were very quick to say that we were not involved in the attacks. But I think that ultimately they think that time is on their side and they can outlast the U.S. president. The U.S. president has to, go through elections every 4 years. They don't have to go through elections like they do have elections, but ultimately it's Khamenei who makes the decisions, and everybody else has to listen to him. That's how I think they view their world.
So from questioning and about time, let's go into scenarios. So we spoke about the potential of a long-term scenario. So how do you see a long-term scenario to what we have discussed, i.e., the leadership, Iran, the bomb? Where do you see this is going in sense of a long term? And long term, I mean 5 to 10 years, not the next year.
Um, I would say, let me go even further. The least likely scenario, in my opinion, is that Iran will give up and sign an unconditional surrender and say, hey, I'm going to give up on everything, on the nuclear program, on the enrichment, everything, in the hopes of some remedy, sanctions relief, investment, etc. That I think is very unlikely. The less likely scenario or unlikely scenario is going for the bomb, um, weaponization. I think they're not going to do it. Although, again, there's a lot of public pressure in the aftermath of the 12-day war. Every time there was a some sort of, even small earthquake in Iran, people would reach out to me and ask me if Iran just tested a nuclear weapon. And these are the people who are in Iran. My answer was, how should I know? Um, I have access to the information that you have. So that's a less likely scenario. The most likely scenario is that Iranians are going to wait for better times, better opportunities, and they will try to reconstitute the program. They already know how to enrich. You cannot bomb that science from their brains, so you can always reconstitute it. So I think then the most likely scenario is that Iran will reconstitute, will begin or restart enrichment to kind of catch up to where it was maybe last year or 2 years ago at this time.
To publish our outlook for 2026 for different topics, different regions across the world. So let's look at three scenarios here. 2026, what do you think is the most likely scenario we're going to see from the Iranian leadership moving forward to the next year?
I think that they would uh, put the infrastructure to reconstitute the program. I think that there will be some limited engagement with the U.S. All the reports on, Saudis exchanging messages between Iranians and Americans, I think they're true. Saudis have found themselves to be in a position, unlike Trump V1, they found themselves to be in a position where they want to de-escalate between Iran and the U.S. So I think there will be some limited engagement between Iran and the U.S. But again, I have to emphasize again that without the enrichment, some level of enrichment capacity in Iran, we're not going to have a deal between Tehran and Washington.
What do you think is the worst case scenario for Iran in 2026?
What, excellent question. I think that we have to look at the Israeli perspective and the red lines. Prior to June 12th and the start of war, or June 23, excuse me, Israel's red line was no Iranian nuclear weapon. Question is, what is Israel's red line right now? Is it enrichment? Is it zero enrichment in Iran? Are the Israelis going to restart the campaign that they started in June? And this is a very dangerous situation because this time around, Iranians think that they have to act more decisive, throw everything they have at Israel to kind of reestablish an equilibrium with the Israelis. And I think it's extremely dangerous. I hope it does not happen. But it will be if it happens, it will be a much larger conflict between Tehran and Tel Aviv or Jerusalem.
In the last scenario, I always like to ask about the black swan, the less likely high impact situation or scenario that you can envision in 2026 in relation to Iran and its leadership.
In Iran,
Yes.
uh, dismantling the program. I don't think it will happen. I don't, I don't have one of those globes that you can, see the world. But I don't think that dismantling of the program is even on the list of the policies that they consider.
And I'm going to use the time because we have one question from Rima, which is about how realistic is re-engagement of Iran scientific talent in reconstructing the nuclear program, given the short life of these scientists. So, in other words, the fear that people have to engage within Iran to engage with the program. So, um, I'm using that question in the. Let me ask it differently. Is there people in Iran that are afraid to touch this hot potato, so to speak? Is there someone that basically says, I'm not going to engage in this, not only from the scientific point of view, but also the decision making itself, that
Yeah.
they're basically afraid to make that decision?
The question, I think it's a good question. It would have been true in early 2000s or late 1990s, where Iranians were their enrichment program was so nascent and rudimentary. But at this point, when you have academic settings, when you have a lot of scientists working on, again, academic side on different aspects of the program. So I think there's always somebody who knows how to do it. And Iranians are very smart people. One thing that distinguishes Iranians from, other people is that they don't want them to fish for them. They want to learn how to fish so they can do it themselves. That's how they learned. Again,
Mm.
I think that again, you assassinate someone, some professor at some university. That professor happens to have a student who's very smart and knows how to do the job. So that person comes to replace them. It might impose short-term setbacks for them, but in the long term, I don't think that it will fundamentally affect the program.
And let me conclude with one last question or maybe a request. Can you give us a little bit of a summary of your book, if you can? Just touch it a little bit and tell us what's the book about before we
Sure.
conclude.
Let me tell you why I started writing this. When I was a graduate student, I was always interested in nuclear issues. Something I noticed was that every literature on the Iranian nuclear program was written by Western experts. And that inherently is not problematic, except that if you're writing on the country's threat perceptions, worldviews, and nuclear program, and if you don't use Iranian sources, you're not doing the justice. Imagine if you're writing a paper on China's nuclear posture, and yet you don't use any Chinese source in your book. So that made me think that there is a significant gap there. So that made me think that there needs to be something there. So I wrote my dissertation on it, and then I started writing the book. And my main argument is that, first of all, the nuclear policies of the Shah and the nuclear policies of the Islamic Republic of Iran are not fundamentally different. Cast of characters have changed, the rhetoric has changed, but the objectives, which I mentioned early in our discussion, that is security, modernization, and energy, are all the same. And because of this, regime changes will not fundamentally affect Iran's nuclear posture. There's, again, the conventional wisdom in DC is that, yes, you topple the Islamic Republic and everything is going to be beautiful. Iran is going to give up on its nuclear program, no problem. Um, um, but I argue the opposite. I actually argue that even without the Islamic Republic in Tehran, you will have any US president will have to face the challenge of Iran and its nuclear program because they want to insist that they have rights. And that's exactly what the Shah was saying, that we have rights under the NPT and you cannot deprive us of our rights. So this is the main argument that I make in the book. I show that Iranian leadership is extremely nationalistic. The things that the Shah and his nuclear chief told the Americans, that you cannot dictate to us what we can do or what we can't do in our country. These are some of the things that you see exactly happening in the Islamic Republic, because their views of the world, their views of Iran as a country, and Iranian civilization, those have not changed.
Very interesting. And Dr. Azodi, thank you so much for joining us today, answering all those questions, engaging in this discussion and scenarios, looking ahead a little bit more than 1 year ahead, but also in the future. Very interesting. And everybody, again, I'm going to say again, there is a link to the book that you can see on our chat. We're going to send you a link with a code that Dr. Azudi is going to share with us for us to provide you, which is a code for a discount. We're going to share it when we're going to basically share with you the webinar when we're going to publish it. So thank you everybody who joined us. Dr. Zudi, thank you so much again for joining us today.
Thanks, Goran. Good to be with you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.